Yay, okay. All right. Nice. All right, guys.
Yay, okay.
Nice. Says on backstage. All right, people. We have our guest. I'm just making my way to getting him in. As you can see, I'm not the best with technology, so I got no idea what I'm doing. Kick from studio. Nope, definitely don't kick from the studio. Add to stream. I think we've done it.
I think I need some more lighting.
We can hear you, dude. You're live. Don't say anything crazy.
I'm just trying to see if I can fix my lighting here. It's so dark on this end. I've got the light behind me, so it kind of...
Nice. I was worried that there was going to be a bunch of darkness behind me too, but I thought that summarized my personality quite well. So, all right, awesome. How you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. A little tired, but doing okay. It's early morning. Well, not too early, but kind of late morning for here. But I've got my second cup of coffee going, so
nice.
Yeah.
I had to stop at 1 cup of coffee. After the first one, I get jittery, and it just ruins my whole day.
I'm usually like that too, but today was just one of those days. My little one crawls into bed with us in the middle of the night, and then kicks me, and so the sleep situation is not the best. But it's better than it was. I'll put it that way.
Nice. Do you mind if I ask how old he is?
He's 3.5.
Okay,
old enough to have an opinion at this point. So,
really?
Oh yeah.
What age do they start talking again?
Depends. Some of them start talking at like 1, a couple of words here and there, but when they start putting sentences together, it's like maybe 1.5 to 2, and when they hit 3, suddenly they know everything. So it's that's the situation we're in.
Dude, I thought this is how crazy it is. I thought they start saying their first word at around 3 years old.
No.
Wow.
Some of them can do it. He was speaking probably about 1.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
That's wow. Okay, so you're definitely over the worst part in terms of like sleep and things like that, right?
Oh yeah. The first couple of months is probably the worst, but then after that it gets a lot better.
Okay, nice. So how the hell do you manage a YouTube channel as you have a normal job and you do this as well?
It's really hard. You have to find little times to kind of just get in as much work as possible.
Right.
Right now, we started him up in preschool, so I've got this like 4-hour block of time in the morning before dropping him off and picking him up again, where I have to do all my writing and reading and everything else I can. And at nighttime you have a little bit of time to read, and then you have to figure out a way to make it all work out. Like I read at night, and then when he's at preschool, it gives me time to dictate. And I do this thing where I read and then write up my script kind of in real time, because when you're reading, whatever you're reading, you get all these ideas. You highlight whatever you need to highlight, and then you're like, oh, this is a really good quote. I got to put that in there. And so that goes immediately into like a 1-page script. And if I can dictate just 1 page a day, that's an accomplishment, because that basically means you did a little bit of research, you've written it all down, and you've managed to dictate it into a format. And once that thing is dictated, the actual video production is something you can kind of do at your leisure. When he's watching TV, or if he's engaged in an activity, there's not that much noise going on in the house, and that gives you time. Video production is probably, I'd say, the easiest part of it. Dictating and coming up with the actual writing it is probably the toughest part.
I definitely agree. Like for me, the hardest part is the script writing.
Yeah.
But you said something interesting. So you, correct me if I'm wrong, you said you write the script as you're reading, like you get a little pieces of inspiration, and then you just jot down what you're thinking about?
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly, because what happens is if you read it, like I found out that if you read the entire book and all the other stuff that goes with it, you look at YouTube videos, or you see articles, and you kind of stash those things away, and then you have like for example, here, let me show you. Here we go. Can you guys see this? This is
what is that?
This is Fourth Crusade.
Fourth Crusade, right?
Right. So, and then it's got all of this little little tabs that are kind of placed in the back here.
Mm.
And as I read the book, I move the tabs along. So you start at the very beginning. You can see like the beginning of the book doesn't have any more tabs, and as you go along, it has all the quotes and stuff. And then I just write up the script, and then when the quotes seem to work into it, it makes the process so much easier. Because otherwise, if you write the whole thing and you read everything ahead of time, it could be like a month or two before you actually publish a video. There's so much, I mean, you know this too.
Yeah.
There's so much research that goes behind every minute of actual video production.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. But I was just wondering because I've had a similar experience to what you're talking about, but I feel like one downside to that is that I might read something right now that gives me a little piece of inspiration, and I feel the need to jot it down. But then, say a page later or 2 pages later, I might read something that doesn't necessarily completely contradict. Obviously, it's not going to contradict what I just read before, but like it makes me look at what I wrote in a different light. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like that could be a real problem in terms of efficiency as well, because now I just have to rewrite everything I wrote before.
I do everything on PowerPoint. And
Oh.
so I wish I could share you. Let me give you a screenshot of this. But I do everything on PowerPoint. And when you are going back through it again to do the actual dictation, if you find extra things that just suddenly like pop up out of nowhere, you're like, oh my God, that would look great in the final production. Then you just kind of snap that right into place. Let me see if I can. Let's see.
Okay, so you don't just straight away put it down on Microsoft Word or anything like that?
It's easier for me on PowerPoint because not only can you do that, you can also clip and paste pictures into the final thing. And sometimes just seeing a photograph of something gives you enough inspiration to change the words right before you dictate it. So you
Right.
can constantly be upgrading it just before it goes in. If you find something new at the very last second, it's like, oh wow, you just put that thing in there. And even when you're doing the actual the video itself, I create the video in these like 30-second to 1-minute intervals on Apple Motion. And if you find like a really great picture, or if you find like some really good video that just inspires you to change the wording around, or you find some little tidbit of history that you think that would like really go well into it, then you can just modify it as you go along. And with Word, I mean, I guess you can do that too. With PowerPoint, I can put the picture right next to the words where I want to modify it and be like, it's kind of like a tab to myself to say, hey, you know what? I want to include that last little bit into it.
Right. Damn, that sounds really smart. I never thought about it like that.
I wonder if I can show you a picture of what I'm talking about here.
Microsoft presentation.
Let me show you here. Let's say, I think there's a way you can do this. So let me see. I got this.
All right, guys, as Nitin is bringing this up, make sure you leave behind questions that you're interested in, because we are going to address the best ones at least a little bit later on. Okay.
Let's see. Upload file. Oh, it won't let me do it. That's weird. Maybe if I change it to a JPEG format. Hold on.
Maybe you could just send it to me on Twitter or something. Forget about everyone else. I'm the important one here.
Yeah. Let's see if I can try it this way. Yeah, I'm gonna send it to you on Twitter.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. So this is just a screenshot of kind of some of the. This is something that I actually just wrote this morning. I'm right now in the Fourth Crusade, and we're getting to that point where you have a change from one dynasty to the next, and the Crusaders have basically put Prince Alexius on the throne, but he's going to be usurped pretty soon. And this is leading up to that very critical moment when the Crusaders actually take over Constantinople itself. So I don't know if you've got this or not, but like this, I wrote this morning just based off of a discussion that I had with a friend of mine yesterday. He said that, like if you're going to make a video, why don't you make something where you kind of start kind of more towards towards the ending at
Hmm.
a key moment, and then kind of go back. You see a lot of YouTubers do this thing where like the battle videos,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they show people like right about to like smash into each other, and then it stops, it pauses, it goes to the commercial endorsement, and then after that it goes to the beginning scene of like how it led up to that particular fight.
Right.
And I kind of like that format. I'm going to be using that for this next video.
It's
Do you
very
use
dramatic, to be
it's
fair.
dramatic. Do you use anything like that too?
Um, No, I don't. But that sounds really good. I think what I tend to do is not every single time, but I try to get into the crux of the story. So not necessarily into the towards the end or anything, but like straight in the middle. And then so that would be my intro, and then the intro music comes on, and then I just start it from the beginning onwards.
Yeah.
Because what you're talking about, it makes a lot of sense, but it's not easy to do. I'll be honest.
No.
I'll be humble enough to put my hands up and say I don't know if I feel confident enough doing that.
Yeah, it's really hard to find sometimes those really key critical moments and
Yeah.
kind of backtracking to that point.
I
Like
mean, to be fair, with a battle, it kind of makes intuitive sense. You kind of know when the crescendo of a battle is. But if, say, for instance, I'm talking about something like the Fatimid Khilafah, like a 50-minute video on its 200, no, yeah, I think more than, yeah, almost 300-year history. It's kind of tough to figure out what exactly is that crescendo moment.
yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It makes much more sense if you're going to be doing a longer format like that to
Mhm.
be able to just tell the narrative from beginning to end.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But dude, I wanted to ask you about the fourth Crusade, because correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the one where the Western Europeans go, and instead of actually going through Constantinople to fight in the Middle East, they just stay in Constantinople and take over, uh, basically dethrone the Byzantines from Constantinople at least.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean this was the most greedy of the crusades. This was the most despotic. This is the one where everything that they set out to do in the beginning, they basically their intentions were completely destroyed. I mean, it was basically one Christian army taking out another Christian army, and in the process of doing that, they basically destabilized the Eastern Roman Empire so much that other civilizations, other groups could rise to power, specifically the Ottomans,
right,
and
right, right.
we all know how that kind of ends up.
Yeah, yeah. But like, what I wanted to ask you specifically is because I've done cursory reading on this topic, but I haven't really delved into it. The Crusaders, when they decided to just take over Constantinople, was it something that they had conspired to do so before they went into Constantinople, or were they in Constantinople, they saw an opportunity, and just attacked at that moment? It's the latter, right?
It's the latter. What happened was is that the Crusaders made a deal with the Venetians that the Venetians would transport them to Egypt because in the previous crusade, in the Third Crusade,
Yeah.
Richard the Lionheart came within 12 miles of Jerusalem, and then at that point he realized that he could take the city, but he could never hold it.
Mm,
The Ayyubids were so powerful that really to take Jerusalem meant taking Egypt first. That
yeah,
was the
yeah.
basis of all their power. And so the Fourth Crusade was actually geared towards taking Egypt, but the only way to get there is by boat. And
Right.
so they made the deal with the Venetians, but then they couldn't pay the Venetians. And the
Mm,
Venetians had basically taken everything off the counter in order to build this fleet, to man it, to provide provisions. And if they couldn't be paid, then Venice would basically go bankrupt. So there was a lot of pressure from their side in order to get the money.
right.
And so they kind of tricked the Crusaders into attacking another Christian city. They took out Zara, and there just wasn't enough money to pay them off. And at that critical moment, the Prince Alexius, whose father who had been usurped, approached them and said, "Hey, you know what? I will pay off all your debt. I will give you tons of money. I will give you anything that you need. I will get you to the Holy Land, but first you have to help me put me back on the throne."
Mm,
And that's what they did. And just by sheer luck, the person that was in charge of the empire was a weak emperor. He wasn't interested in ruling. He just wanted to enjoy the benefits of being emperor in terms of pleasure. And he basically abandoned the city. So
Mhm.
they put Prince Alexius in power, and when he came to power, he opened up the treasury vaults and found out that there's no money left to pay off anybody. So
Mm.
that's when he started. He was put into a weird position because he was basically taking over. The aristocracy didn't like him, and he had to pay an immense amount of money to both the Venetians and the Crusaders, and his treasury couldn't support it. So he started just basically looting anything that he could find, temples, churches, high taxes, and his aristocracy was fed up with it. And eventually they turned on him, threw him out. And once he was thrown out of power and eventually killed, the Crusaders realized, hey, you know what? We need to get our money one way or the other. And the only way to do it is to take Constantinople. So initially, the initial idea, so the long story short, they didn't set out to conquer Constantinople. It
Yeah,
was just something that they were kind of pressured to do at the very end of it.
that makes
But
sense.
but
That
I
makes
mean, it just goes to show how something with the best of intentions, with the idea that the planning was there. Pope Innocent III was somebody who understood logistics. He understood that there needed to be a plan in play.
yeah,
And even with the best of plans, it can go completely awry. And then what do you have? You have one Christian army destroying the basis of power of an entire Christian empire. And
yeah,
that and that's why people look back at it and they're like, oh my God, what were they thinking on this?
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it was just an opportunistic,
Oh yeah.
you
Oh,
know.
yeah. They saw it, they saw an opportunity, they went right in. That's it.
But so that I think that's called like the Latin Empire, right?
Yeah, they established the Latin Empire until 1261, I think.
Right,
So
right. So between that time, 1204 and 1261, so that's the fourth. I think there's like another eight, no, eight, sorry, like another five crusades or something like that, right?
yeah, I mean, after that there was they tried to go after Egypt. It
Yeah.
failed. Louis the Ninth led his forces then to Tunisia, and then
Oh
the
yeah.
plague hit them, and then that was the
Yeah,
end of
yeah,
it.
the Barbary Crusade. But they also took Jerusalem as well, right? I think 1226. But that
They
wasn't necessarily by force. I think that
no,
was
they bought their way in,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it wasn't really yeah.
But
In fact, the person who did it, I think he was cursed by his own men. He was not very. I forgot the name of the
I
guy who
think
did
it
it.
was the grandson of Salahuddin, Al-Kamil or something like that. Something to that.
Yeah, it was a deal. It was like a brokered kind of a thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It
yeah, yeah.
wasn't the glorious, like the first crusade where they went in for God and country and then butchered everybody in the city for 3 days. It was kind of like it was just they kind of paid their way in, which
Yeah. But my question was how so in that time span between the Fourth Crusade and 1261, what like do we know about what the relationship was like between Constantinople and the invading Crusader forces, regardless of where they were going, Jerusalem, Egypt, Tunisia? Did they use Constantinople as like a base for these Crusader activities, or was it an antagonistic relationship?
it was. I don't know too much about that particular time period. I haven't gotten to that point yet, but I
Hmm.
will say that up until that point, there was a lot of animosity between the Byzantine and the Crusaders.
Mm,
During the very first crusade, there
yeah,
was one particular time when they were besieging Antioch,
right.
and the Byzantine were supposed to come in and help out. Wait, let me move this thing a little closer. Can you hear me okay? If I
I can hear you okay,
that
man. It's just annoying things happening with my Discord notifications.
Oh,
It's
okay.
coming up.
Okay.
I have no idea why it's doing that.
Yeah, I mean, in the first crusade, the Byzantine were supposed to help out at Antioch, and they didn't come. And there's other reasons for that. You can argue that it was the Crusaders' own fault. There was one Stephen of Blois who abandoned the crusade, and as he was making his way back, he bumped into a Byzantine army, a Byzantine relief army that had supplies and provisions, and he told them, "Hey, you know what? The crusade is dead. They've died before Antioch. It's a failed cause. Don't go." And
Mm,
so they turned back. But even past that point, in the second crusade, there was accusations that the Byzantine were actually helping out the Seljuk. During the third crusade, there was rumors that there was an alliance with Saladin.
mm,
And during the Fourth Crusade, there was by the time of the Fourth Crusade, there was so much animosity between East and West.
mm,
And I'm not talking about just political. I'm talking about the fact that there was a lot of Latins that were living in Constantinople, trade had rebounded,
Mm.
and the Byzantine couldn't stand them. It was this thing where you have these people that are living in your city, that are getting rich, and you just can't stand them. And eventually, it broke out into massive rioting. In 1182, there was the massacre of the Latins,
Mm.
and later on, after the Crusaders had put that Prince Alexius into place, there were other riots that would break out, and a lot of people felt that these riots were kind of a payback for what happened in 1182. And so there was a lot of tug of war between the two of them. And of course, after the Latin Empire was established, what was left of the Byzantine broke off into these various chunks. You had the Empire of Nicaea. You had these other rump states. The Trebizond, yeah, the Empire of Trebizond. The Despotate of Epirus, I think, was one of them. And
Maria.
Yeah, and so it was like you had all of this fracturing, and I'm sure the Latin Empire was a little bit more friendly, but as to what degree they helped out, I can't really quote on that. I just haven't gotten that far yet.
Right. Yeah, because at that time, like the First Crusade and the Second Crusade, I don't know about the Third Crusade, but the Byzantines were run by the Komnenian dynasty, right?
Right.
Like that's seen as a little bit of a what do you call it, like a renaissance.
It was their last high point. It was the last golden age.
The last golden age, right.
And golden age.
It was Alexius Komnenos, the first one of the Komnenian dynasty, that invited these crusaders, right?
He didn't invite him. He was just asking for a couple of reinforcements. He had done amazing work at reestablishing parts of the empire. And in a lot of situations, all he needed was a little bit of help to fight off a group. He took on the Pechenegs, and destroyed them. He needed a little help from the Cumans, and that's all he needed, was just a few extra reserves. After he had kind of solidified what was going on in the Western Front, he turned his attention to the Seljuk, and they were implacable. You just could not move them. And so he started asking a lot of people for help. It wasn't just the Western
Crusade.
Church. Yeah. And so when it got to Pope Urban II, he took this plea for a couple extra mercenaries, and he blew it up into the massive crusades. And part of that, too, was that the papacy was having a lot of trouble. I mean, Urban II couldn't even enter Rome. There was an anti-pope in power. And so
I heard I think that's around 2 decades before Pope Urban II's time. But when I was in uni, I read about what is it called? The investiture.
The investiture controversy. Yeah, who can actually determine who's going to be the bishops and
the cardinals and whatnot.
Yeah. And so there was a big problem with that too. It basically was Urban II's way of showing that he still had some manhood left. They wanted to show that they had some sort of ability to still assert some sort of control. But if you're going to do it all the way.
Power, am I correct in thinking that at that time the balance of power was in the favor of the popes, the papacy? Because I have this thing in my head where I think it was Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, and it must have been Gregory something in like 1070.
Yeah, Gregory VII.
Nice, okay. But I think he made the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV, I think he made him like stand bare feet outside of his castle to like beg for forgiveness or something like that.
For 3 days.
For 3 days,
exactly right. And he had to dress in loincloth and barefoot and do the whole nine in the snow.
Dude, if you're an emperor and you have to do this to someone, if you're the Pope, you can make someone do this. And that guy calls himself an emperor, like you're a powerful dude, right?
Like, can you imagine like the Pope being able to do that? Like that's now?
Crazy. Yeah, imagine Donald Trump has to just go up to him or
Putin.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, that's why popes are so interesting. Have you ever thought about doing videos on popes?
There's a group that I know that actually does that. They go through and they rank all the different popes. There's a podcast called Pontificates, and they rank them based on like how good they were and how much power they wielded. And some of them are just they got into power and they died like a month later, and some of them were like Innocent the Third. I mean, he came into power when he was like 35 or 37,
No
and
way.
he came from like a wealthy family. He was educated in the University of Paris and Bologna. He was a lawyer. He had all this background, and he came into power with the idea that he wanted the papacy to be the predominant power in Europe. And he came in at just the right time. Everybody else was fighting each other. The Holy Roman Empire was in civil war. England was that whole thing between Richard dying and his brother John taking power.
Oh yeah.
France was doing pretty good, but still, and of course, the Spain was still probably like another 200 years off, 200 and almost 300 years off. So he wanted to reassert power, and the Fourth Crusade was only one of many crusades that he inaugurated. So
Innocent the Third. Which other ones did he do?
Albigensian
Baltics and stuff?
Crusade, and there was the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, which was the Innocent Third backed that up. There was also several little minor things. He also established several orders, the Franciscan and the Dominican. So he was active in the process of basically reorganizing and turning the papacy into this kind of like almost military force to be reckoned with. It's
right.
I mean, he's if there was ever a Panzer Pope, you ever heard that term? Because I think one of the popes that we had now was in the Hitler Youth at one point. If there was ever a Panzer Pope, this guy was it. I mean, he was kind of nuts almost.
You had another, my favorite Pope, well, my favorite in the sense that he's interesting to learn about. I don't know if he's my favorite in terms of character, but I don't know the actual name of his when he was a Pope, but his original name is Borgia.
Oh yeah, the Borgia
century.
corpse. They were from Spain. I think.
Yeah, they're originally from Spain. Exactly, you're right. They made like a show about it, HBO or something, like a decade ago. And they, like, the daughter was having an affair with her brother, and her brother was a really capable guy, but he died early, and there was just a lot of intrigue and stuff. That guy was apparently very.
They what was their phrase? Like we just earned the papacy. Now we should enjoy it.
Right.
Like if anybody wanted to go party with that was going to be them. And man, they took it to an all new level. I mean, they would have orgies like in the
crazy.
Talk about a 180 from the time of Innocent the Third. I kind of agree with you. The guy was kind of despotic. He his character had
but I found him interesting.
He was determined, but he's one of those ruthless people in history. But some could argue that no matter what you do, no matter what civilization you come from, to attain that level of power and be notable in the history books, you have to be somewhat ruthless. You have to be perfectly willing to send people off to their death and just blow it off like it's nothing.
Yeah. I mean, I have a very big problem with people saying things like that, because I understand why people would say stuff like that, because you can make a definite correlation in terms of how history has unfolded. But I feel like saying something like that often just is like not justification, but it's like it excuses them and lets people off the hook too easily. Because you can do that, you can, quote unquote, get rid of people, but for good aims. You know what I mean? And I know this is quite a problematic discussion to have in the first place, but say you have a good aim of bringing greater stability to people's lives, I would argue that is incredibly different to getting rid of people for your own greed and for the attainment of your own power. And then again, you can.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, how many times have we seen that in history where people have to do that particular type of thing in order to achieve the greater good? And then there's that always counter argument of, do the ends justify the means?
Yeah, exactly.
And is there better ways to accomplish this thing? And I think that my point is that you have to have at least some degree where you're perfectly fine with being able to sacrifice others in order to attain your goals. And again, it comes down to the discussion of what those goals are. If you're out there and you're wanting to establish an empire and enslave other people, go forth to the new world and push Christianity down someone's throat, that's one thing. It's another thing altogether if you are like Winston Churchill and you're fighting at the peak of the London
World War
Blitz,
II.
trying to keep your people together to continue fighting. I mean,
Yeah.
that's another discussion altogether.
Yeah, no, I exactly. I understand that. But then again, that's a very good example because, say, Winston Churchill, I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that his policies, specifically in the Bengal region in eastern India,
Mhm.
led to some sort of a famine, which obviously led to the deaths of. I read figures of millions, but I feel like those kind of figures just get thrown about nowadays. But if it's millions, that's crazy,
Mhm.
because he prioritized the war effort in order to beat the Nazis, than for ordinary people in the Bengal to be able to feed themselves. So that is a very, very tricky scenario to kind of wrap your head around morally, because you can argue that beating the Nazis was probably the most important thing at that moment in time. But then if you go up to the Bengalis and you say that, they're like, I don't care about Hitler. Like, I care
Yeah.
about, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, I don't want to die. Why do I have to starve for you to? This is a European problem. Can you guys just sort this out over there?
Right. No, my dad is Bengali.
Okay.
So yeah, I grew up with a very different version of history, especially about the Second World War. There
Oh,
was
really?
oh yeah, I mean,
How is it different?
you get it from kind of the Indian perspective, you know. But ooh, I was born and raised, or I was born at least for the first 4 years of my life. I lived in what is now Calcutta, and
Mm,
that's right there on the border. And when the English were in power, that would be their line in the sand, so to speak, against the Japanese. And
right.
so you had this whole story. I mean, those are one of the fronts of the Second World War that most people don't really hear about.
That's a good point.
And I was brought up with that. Of course, you know, I have family that even to this day they remember when India was established as a country. That they remember the partition. They remember the kind of stuff that everybody had to go through, the moving of families and whatnot. So you get a different perspective, I guess, if you've had that kind of
Dude,
background.
can I speak to you about that a little bit? I'm not, you don't need to go super deep into your own, family's trauma about the partition, but I've just always been so interested in the Indian partition. I can't think of another incident in human history which is as like catastrophically significant. But what I mean by that is, like, in terms of a single incident which involves the number of people that it did. You
Oh,
know what I mean? Because,
I mean,
like,
forced relocation of any group is going to be problematic. But when you're talking about millions like this that have to be
I've
moved
read
in
up
close
to 15
proximity,
million. Like,
it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And of course, nothing is going to be done like clockwork, and things are going to
yeah,
break down.
of course, of course.
Yeah, you know,
Did you
my
have any family members that kind of moved?
oh yeah, my mother's side, we were they were living in what is now Pakistan,
Hmm.
and they had to go from there down into New Delhi. That's kind
Hmm.
of where they settled. So from my mother's perspective, you know, she was alive when the partition happened. She was a young girl when it actually they were making families move back and forth, and she remembers times when she was kind of hushed away from something where the streets were basically full of blood. I mean, it was an extremely traumatic time. There was a tremendous amount of bloodshed, and it's another example of when you have. And I was hoping to kind of avoid this conversation, but it's a
We don't have to
situation.
talk about this if
No,
you
no,
don't
no,
want.
no, no. It's a situation where you have colonial powers that are moving out of a situation
Hmm.
and they don't know what to do. They
Yeah,
divide people up by using a pencil on a map.
yeah.
And by doing that, and again, I'm using these broad terms.
Hmm.
There's always nuances to all of this, but you have people that are dividing people on a map with a pencil,
Yeah.
and they're not keeping in mind anything about rivalries or ethnicities or anything to that extent. And you end up with a situation where you're going to have a very destabilized environment. And I've actually read books where they speculate that The British did this almost on purpose in order to keep those areas destabilized.
Mm.
When the same thing can be said of the Middle East when they were
Israel and Palestine.
exactly.
Mm.
Even after the First World War, the way they divided everything up,
Yeah.
the way they divided Iran and Iraq up,
Yeah.
it was meant to keep the area destabilized, or at least some people could argue that.
No, absolutely, man. I mean, a bunch of my when I did my masters, it was about the modern Middle East, and that whole policy, which I'm sure you're aware of in the context of India, divide and conquer,
Yeah.
was very much used and utilized by the British and the French in the Middle East, where I mean, you can still see the legacy of that, because one thing like the British and the French would both do is they would rule through the minorities.
Yeah.
Because they would think, all right, they would just go up to the minorities and say, listen, we're going to back you, and you should be glad that we're doing this, because this other majority, if we're not here, they're going to do bad things to you, which is ridiculous, by the way, because those minorities and majorities had lived together since before they had even heard of what Europe was, for thousands of years. But whatever, they kind of played on these supposed fears that humans sometimes have when doubt creeps in and whatnot, and they just said, okay, we can use you guys in the bureaucracy and the administration, and that is like the legacy of that. I mean, it's tough to draw a direct genealogical line between that, but like for instance in Syria now, where you have a tiny minority in the shape of the Alawites, the Alawite ethnic religious sect that it is, ruling a majority of largely Sunnis, but a bunch of other people as well. And that's partly what Britain tried to do in Iraq, the French tried to do in Lebanon and in Syria and places like that. I don't know if there's necessarily some sort of a conspiracy where they, in the pullout, they wanted things to be destabilized, because in general, when it comes to politics and even in history, and when I deal with humans in normal life, I give a lot of credence to lack of human competence. Like, I think loads of things, loads of really big, really important things happen just because of incompetence. And when I'm thinking of things like the partition of India, I mean, I don't want to just be like all condescending and say it's ridiculous to say that there's a conspiracy, but I think most of it can be attributed to the fact that the British, they didn't care, which is very important and very sad. But I think much of it is just incompetence. They drew, like you said, they drew the lines in the sand without having a proper appreciation of, all right, there's a bunch of Muslims there, but there's also a bunch of Muslims like over here as well, and blah blah blah, things like that. Having a proper understanding of what was happening on the ground. But then again, to be fair, hubris is part and parcel of imperialism, right?
Yeah.
Like, you think you're better than that other person, so I don't need to know your reality. I know the right answer.
That's right.
Right?
It's a very paternalistic model. We've come
Yeah.
here to save you from yourself, kind of a thing. So
Right. Which is, I mean, is the annoying thing is, right? Like, I'm very interested in current affairs as well, so I understand the need to kind of do things in a diplomatic manner, where say you need what you call it, a reason to invade a country, or you come up with things like the white man bird and blah blah blah. But it's just more so than anything, it's just insulting my intelligence. Like, if I'm say in India and say like the British come and they go, hey, we're going to civilize you, you have this crazy religion called Hinduism and Islam, we're going to give you a way better one. Don't insult my intelligence. Just take my resources and just leave me alone, okay?
yeah, that's right. If you're gonna exploit me, just exploit me.
Yeah.
Don't do it under
What are
the
you talking
veneer that
about?
you're trying to make it a lot better.
I've got a culture that's 5,000 years old. What do you mean we're primitive? What are you talking about? Leave me alone. Just take my resources. You're stronger than me. Leave my culture alone, please.
That's right. But I mean, you got to think about why they had to do it that way. I mean, they had to kind of justify it to themselves and their own people that we're doing this for the greater moral burden of taking these poor savages out of their their destitution and raising them to a higher level. It's
Absolutely, dude. Like,
yeah.
Like in India more so than most places, India and Pakistan, where when you go there, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know in Pakistan this is the case, because I spent some time there. But some of the best institutions, maybe you can argue the best higher education institutions, their universities that like all of their names start with Saint Xavier or Saint Edward or something like that, where they
Right.
would be started by Christian, Protestant, Anglican missionaries, and that would be started from the kind of thing that you just spoke about, where it's almost as if they're justifying it to themselves that we're actually doing something nice to like help them. But yeah, that's like one thing a lot of people in the formerly colonized world, I don't really hear in their rhetoric that much, just a lot of anger. But
And
yeah,
and and
understand.
th- and think about like how this has changed over time too. I mean, you go back far enough, and you have people that are just confronting each other because they're there, right? Like, okay, you have resources that we want to exploit. We're going to invade you and take you over and enslave you, and we're going to call it a day.
Yeah,
And then as time progresses, you go through the Enlightenment, and you go through this thing where it's like, okay, we have to do something for the better moral cause. And
yeah,
and you're right. It insults people's intelligence in the end, because in the end, that's what they're going to be doing, is basically just exploiting. I mean, look when the conquistadors. We're getting up to that part in my podcast where you got the unification of Spain,
right.
and all of those values that were established in the Reconquista, especially in that kind of tail end when you have Isabella coming to power. You have this pertinent drive to take the Moors and kick him out of Spain, kick him off the continent, so to speak.
Right.
And this is almost, some could even argue this is retribution for the fall of Constantinople that happened like 50 years prior to this.
Right.
Then you take those values and you apply it to the New World, right?
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to go in there. And yes, you happen to have resources and gold and, land and people that can be enslaved and be used to whatever. But, we're bringing Christianity with us. Huh? Doesn't that
Yeah.
make it all better? And yeah, it seems like people need to have a justification for what they're doing. Oh, hold on. I've got family coming in.
No worries.
Give me 1 sec.
No worries. No worries. Yeah. I mean, that's a very good point that Nitin just made. Like, you almost more so than anything have to explain it to yourself, because nobody really likes being a monster. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No worries. No worries. Is that your other kid?
It's my little one. Yeah, he just got home.
Okay.
We're out in the park today. So
Nice. Yeah, let's talk about something a little more light-hearted than imperialism.
yeah.
All right, I wanted to ask you something specifically about one of the video. Well, it's not a video; it's actually a podcast you're doing. Attila the Hun, right?
Yeah.
You do these awesome long format videos. How long is your Attila the Hun video? Isn't it like 3 hours long?
Altogether, yeah, about 3.5 hours.
Right. So, what is it like? What got you interested in Attila? How did you find material to do a 3-hour podcast on him? What's so fascinating about Attila?
He marked one of the final nails in the Western Roman Empire, and what drives people to do that kind of thing. Western Roman Empire had been long established. It had this, predominance over most of Western Europe, and then you had the barbarian invasions one after the other, and a lot of these invasions were spurred by the Huns that were slowly moving in.
Okay.
And so a lot of these people were actually fleeing, like the Visigoth that were trying to escape across the Danube. They were running.
They were fleeing from the Huns?
They were fleeing from the Huns.
Oh.
The Huns were slowly pushing in and moving them along. I mean, granted, the Huns would not always be successful, but they were considered to be the worst of the worst. And they were the ones that, when they made their impact, they established this massive empire. At the height of Attila's reign, he had something that was like from the Balkans all the way down to the Danube.
Right.
It was also something that was kind of out of my comfort zone. When you go into history, you get, and I'm guilty of this too. You have people that are really big into the Roman Empire, and you got people that are big into World War II. And that was kind of my thing. And I was like, I got to do something other than this. That there's got to be someplace where you can start. And when I looked on, there was not very much about him. And going through the books, there was only so much that was written. I figured this was something that I can kind of like tackle and kind of figure out.
Right.
The next one after that was the Punic Wars, which there's so much information. It was like volume overload.
Mm,
And with this one, it was manageable.
that makes sense. I had a quick question. I think somebody asked it in the comments as well. You see Attila the Hun, right? So the Huns, they originate from like around Mongolia, China area, correct? So how far back do you have to go generationally to track Attila the Hun's ancestors to that area? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but they were moving westward from Mongolia, China, to like Europe, correct? How long did that journey take?
Nobody knows specifically for sure.
Okay.
In fact, even the origin of the Huns is still a little unknown. Plus, it's even more difficult because they didn't really give a lasting history. Everything that's known about them is based on
Yeah.
what the Romans wrote or what other groups that were being attacked by them wrote.
Right,
And
right.
so you can imagine what kind of history that's going to leave.
Mm.
But the barbaric invasion, the barbarian invasions were happening over a period of not just decades, but like century. So
Okay.
at some point, the conquest speed, I think, kind of increased and really pushed people into the Western Empire.
Okay. But the primary base of Attila the Hun's uh, activities, conquest-wise, were, you said, around the Danube area, right? Like, how far east? I'm trying to figure out how far east were his military activities.
Oh, he would make it as far as Paris and beyond.
No, no, no,
Uh,
east.
East. Sorry.
Yeah.
In the east, let me think here. I think there's a map that I have.
Did he go into the Caucasus or
He
no?
did go into the Caucasus a little bit.
Okay.
And there was one point, I think there was one of his expeditions where he actually went around near the Caspian Sea. So,
Wow.
he was all over it. But that's the thing. Anybody that's on horse, your ability to move is going to be so much more substantial. It's not like if you're in the Roman Empire and you have people that are basically marching from point A to point B, the most they can do is maybe about 30 miles a day. With the Huns, you had people that can travel vast distances.
Hmm.
And so their ability to attack in different areas was quite. The Mongols would show this a little bit later too. I mean, they were all over.
Definitely. But considering your Indian heritage and my Afghan heritage, I know that as part of at least ancient Afghanistan's history, there was another group. I always butcher this name. It's so unnecessarily hard. I need Wikipedia's help. Hephthalites. Did I pronounce?
I'm not even familiar with them. Are those based like on the Scythians?
Kind of. They're around that time. I think the easier way of saying it, they're called the White Huns, but they were around like the fourth, maybe I think that's the 5th, 6th century. But they went into like northern India as well. I guess around the Punjab, Sindh type area now. So if they're Huns, and you got Attila the Hun, who's a Hun, and to be fair, the time difference isn't that different. To be fair, I think they were actually active in the same 5th century. So, like, do you know if there's any correlation between those people?
I don't know. I can't really comment on that. This is, I mean, I know that there was different offshoots from the Huns themselves. Different groups, different tribes would go off and do their own things. But yeah, I really can't comment on this one. I'm reading this thing for the first time.
Because that's the really interesting thing, and you nipped it in the bud. To be fair, when you said that a lot of what we know about Attila the Hun is from people that were his enemies, and I think that's the case with a bunch of these Turkic groups. Say around, I don't know, from 500 BC to 500 AD, where they didn't necessarily write down what they were saying. Like Afghanistan is filled with those. Like you have something else called the Turk Shahis in the 7th and the 8th and the 9th century. They ruled like Eastern Afghanistan, but we barely know anything about them. We know a lot about them through, all we know about them is largely through Abbasid and Umayyad chroniclers.
Yeah, well, it's interesting if these the White Huns managed to make it into the Punjab, because there's so many groups that they just couldn't get over the mountains and get to the Khyber Pass. Yeah, I mean, but I guess it's a matter of some civilizations and some groups actually make that impact and some don't. But you're right. I mean, if your entire history is based on what somebody else is writing about you, then there's not going to be much known.
Exactly. That's why certain dynasties, like, have you heard of the Kushan dynasty?
Mhm.
Like they're fascinating, man. Like stretching from northern India to like, I don't know, where the Uyghurs live in China, Xinjiang. That like, because you have to go through, like you said, the Hindu Kush mountains, the Khyber
Right.
Pass,
Which
some
is
of the
not
Himalayas.
exactly the most
Yeah,
compromising of terrain. I mean, if you're going to establish an empire there, it's going to be tough.
yeah. But then again, to be fair, I've heard that that is traditionally a very prosperous route, trade route, like
Yeah.
connecting Bengal, like Chittagong, all the way to Kabul in eastern Afghanistan, and then from there, obviously, you connect to the Silk Road. But it's interesting how you get such prosperous cities cropping up in areas that are just a definition of inhospitable,
Right.
but they make it work.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. I mean, it just speaks to the ability for people to adapt to a
Mm,
situation. And
yeah.
I mean, how many times in history do you have situations where you have people that they're always kind of pushing the limit? It's like, for example, your Kushan Empire. You have
Yeah.
people that are not just establishing like little bases and that's it. No, that they're asserting their dominance over an entire area. That's incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And this one thing, and not to sound like I'm moaning all the time, but sometimes I get annoyed when people come at, like when modern people have this sort of arrogance about where we are right now is so much more advanced than people were, say, like 1,000 years ago. In every regard, I understand that we are more advanced, of course, but in every regard, right? Like if you go to your Twitter, I just sent you an image
Uh huh.
of something. It's called the Minaret of Jam. I don't want to sound like I'm some Afghan nationalist over here just talking about Afghan history, but this place is fascinating because it's in the middle of mountains, and this is one of the few remnants of the capitals of the Ghurid Empire. They were around like in the 12th and the 13th century, just after the Ghaznavids, like Mahmoud of Ghazni, just before the Mongols, actually. And they built this bad boy, which is one of the only remnants we have of their capital cities, in the mountains. Like, how, like, we can't, can we do that now? I don't know. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's crazy.
Well, when in doubt, it was built by aliens, right?
Yeah. I love that.
Well, I mean, it's there were people that were just as smart and innovative and clever back then as they are now. It's I mean, this is magnificent that they can do this.
Yeah, it's really sad actually because it's like on the verge of collapsing. But
Oh,
yeah, but it's
yeah, look,
crazy that it's lasted for what, 800-900 years.
and the inscriptions and the calligraphy and just the detail that goes into this thing. It's just, I mean, the mathematics alone that was needed to create something
Mm.
like this is impressive.
That's a good point actually, because I feel like that's what a lot of people they tend to forget when it comes to architecture is that it's based on mathematics. It's based on engineering, right?
Right.
It's not just you got a bunch of slave labor to just put bricks and mud together. Like there had to be somebody who's directing. Like if you go to Istanbul and you look at the Hagia Sophia or you look at some of the Ottoman Golden Age monuments, like I remember when I went to Istanbul and I'm like standing inside of the Suleymaniye Mosque or the Blue Mosque, whichever one, all of them. And I'm just looking at the scale of it. I'm like, how the, and it looks perfect. Everything,
Right.
like every arch is like symmetrical to the other one, and it's just like, what the hell?
Like I went to Volubilis in Morocco, and let me send you a picture. It was a major city in North Africa,
Okay.
and it was one of the hubs of. Let me see here.
Oh, is this before the Romans?
During the Romans. I just sent you the name, but take a look at it. It's a massive city for Roman
Ah,
time period, and this was
okay.
on the very very edge of Roman civilization. Like
Right.
literally, you had this city, and then there was the Sahara Desert. You can go
Yeah.
any further south. But if you go there, and again, this is on the very fringe of a major civilization, and yet you have civic planning. You have the two main thoroughfares that all the Roman cities were based off of, that divided the city into 4 quadrants. In the very center, you have archwork, you have mosaics, you have all the accoutrement of major civilization and all of their technology in something that was on their outmost edge. And I think that what really struck me, like, for example, if you have a major civilization, of course you're going to have these major areas that are absolutely beautiful and breathtaking. But if you have that on the very fringe, it goes to show just how impressive that civilization really was.
Absolutely. That's a great point, actually. Yeah. Because on the edges of it, you're often going to have frontiers that are neighboring hostile tribes a lot of the time. Yeah.
And if you can bring that level of civilization to that kind of thing, it's that's an impressive thing that you can do.
For sure, man. For sure. I have a friend who is into ancient history, like before, so we were talking about the Indus Valley civilization. And he was just telling me that I don't understand how exactly they know this, because because he kept saying through computer imaging, so through the archaeological digs, and then if you put them into a computer, they can produce certain imagery of what the cities would have looked like, I guess 4,000-5,000 years ago. But he was just talking about how, like, the pictures he sent me and the kind of animations that they had, it looked like a city from the future. Forget about 4,000 years ago. It looked incredible. There was like a certain section for like hospitals and where the government buildings and stuff were. There was proper sewage systems. There were proper compartmentalized roads. There was just an overall structure to the city that I was like, what, 5,000 years ago? I thought we were like cavemen 5,000 years ago. How did they do this?
Yeah, it's like with Angkor Wat. They're using LiDAR now to find out what the cities actually look like without all the jungle, and they were just as extensive and just as detailed and just as elaborate as anything else out there. The Mayan civilization. My wife and I, she's Latina, so she speaks fluent Spanish, right? And so we traveled down to the Yucatan, and everywhere you drive, you see it's basically a flat kind of an area. There's some mountains here and there. Mostly it's flat, and then every once in a while you see a bump in the horizon that's covered with vegetation.
Okay.
And you know that's a city. It just hasn't been discovered yet.
Why?
The Mayans had basically taken over most of the peninsula. They had cities all over the place, and it's only now that they're discovering all these things left and right. And I think if they apply that LiDAR to the Yucatan, they're going to find out exactly the same thing, just how elaborate these cities are. They're breathtaking.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of that part of the world, I mean, you probably know more about this, but when I was in university, when I was doing my bachelor's, one of the essays I had to write was about the conquistadors when they first discovered Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. So I forget who. I think it was the soldier called Bartolomeu de la Diaz, something along those lines. But he was a soldier, and so 1520, they kind of went to Tenochtitlan, and he was writing this like in the 1560s. So he must have been a young man when he went to Tenochtitlan. But some of the, and I don't know how much of this was exaggerated, but some of the description was incredible.
He described it as like a Venice. I remember this description.
Yeah.
He was blown away. He didn't think that something like this could exist, and especially from people that were considered to be, savages.
Yeah,
for them to have a city that rivaled anything in Europe, because Tenochtitlan was actually it was more impressive than several of the major cities in Europe. And it was like Venice. It had canals. There were bridges that connected. It was built in the middle of a lake.
Yeah.
And they had causeways that could be broken down and lifted up, and so that people could get in and out.
Yeah.
And he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had to come up with justifications that, God intervened or something to that extent that they made this thing possible. And he was completely blown away.
That's one thing I always fantasize about, the inner history nerd in my head. Whenever I think about the top, like if a genie came to me and said, listen, I got a time machine for you, where are we going? Just put down the date in the time machine and let's see. And honestly, obviously I have to be immune, right? I can't die because otherwise I'm not going back in time at all. That's one cool thing about the modern times. But I would probably like, I don't know about number one, but in my top three would be to be with the conquistadors and just for see Tenochtitlan for the first time. Like, what would you think? It's a major, major metropolis in the middle of a lake, and there's
Yeah.
swamps all around. Like, it doesn't make sense. And you've got structures which don't look like structures you have on continental Europe. You have like these pyramids that, I mean, the pyramid, so you can probably figure out that it's a pyramid, but like even then, the shape is different to
what you're
to
used to.
yeah, in Egypt and whatnot.
And
So
the
it
way
was
they were painted, the
magical.
decoration that went into it, it's something that you've never experienced before.
Right,
It's
right.
and then the size, and then keep in mind too that the Aztec were relative newcomers to that area too. So everything that you see before you was a
Mm.
relatively new city. It's not like Rome that had been there for 1,000 years. It's not like Constantinople that had been there since the founding in the 4th century. This was a relatively new city at the time.
So yeah, a new city. But you said they were like, did you say they were new arrivals? The Aztecs.
The
Where
Aztec
did
were
they come from?
people that migrated into the area, and again, I haven't gotten to this part, but I've read a couple of things prior to this. They were relative newcomers,
Really?
and they were people that had to kind of muscle their way in. They were given some of the worst territory around that area. That was according to the. And again, you have to excuse me. I haven't gotten to this part yet, but based on kind of what I've read in the past, it's they were given not that great of territory, and they had to
Mm.
kind of expand, make alliances with people, exploit them, and then slowly muscle their way to the top, taking out everything they could to establish this empire. When the Aztec were firmly in place. Their power was based on this hegemony of basically keeping other people oppressed.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's part of the reason why Cortez was so successful in taking him out, is because he made alliances with the people that had been oppressed by them for so long.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that was the only way he could be successful. If it wasn't for their help, there's no way that Cortez could have done
With
what he did.
300 conquistadors
Yeah,
could conquer.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely, I agree. I knew that like the Aztecs had only been established in the 1400s, but I didn't know they moved from somewhere else. I wonder where they moved from.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look more into that when
Do
the
you think
time
it's like
comes.
more
But
north or more south? Do you think it's from like Texas or is from like Central
I think it
America?
would probably be more from the north, but I'm not 100%. I mean,
Because dude, that
the
would be
Inca.
crazy if the Aztecs migrated down from Texas. I don't know why. In my head, I just that would be like. Then technically, the Aztecs would be a part of American history, American culture.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Wow.
there was also so where I did my training. See, I got my St. Louis University T-shirt
Mm.
here. In St. Louis, Missouri, you had an entire civilization that was up and down the Mississippi River Valley. And a lot
Okay.
of they were mound builders. They would build these massive mounds. In fact, just outside of St. Louis, there's a place called Cahokia,
Mm.
which was one of the major cities at the time. And when the Spanish conquistadors went through, there were reports of them climbing to the top of these mounds and looking out at the horizon, and all they could see was different mounds everywhere. Um,
Mm.
you know, smoke coming out of a lot of them because they were having dinner, that kind of thing. And as far as the horizon, there was some vestiges of civilization wherever they saw.
Right.
Later, when the conquistadors came through in their second wave, a lot of that was wiped out. A disease had spread through and basically destroyed a good portion of the population. So there wasn't very much civilization left when the later conquistadors came through. But some of the mounds that they built were kind of similar to what the Aztec would have.
Mm-hmm.
You had these like kind of pyramids on top of pyramid kind of formations.
Wow.
So there might be some credence to that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Do you ever wonder how, like, if the Europeans hadn't gone over to the Americas, like, what could things look like in Central, Southern, and I guess Northern America? Do you ever think about that? Like, how could the Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incans, how would they have developed by, say, the 1800s?
So that's a really good question, because when you look at the type of relationships that the people had, the indigenous North American people had, they were warlike with one another. They had like the Comanche. If you ever read about the Comanche, they are some of the most brutal people. They made the Huns look like nothing in comparison. When
They're from like the Americas,
uh
like the United States of America, right?
Yeah, like parts of Texas, Arizona, that whole area. When they adapted horses, because the Europeans brought horses, there were no horses before that time. But when the Comanche had the ability to have horses, they would terrorize anything in their path, and they would be so brutal in their conquest. The stories about them were just horrendous, what they would do to people. And you're talking about a time period that was maybe 20 years before the American Civil War. um, they had the ability to keep the Americans in line. And the only way that they got driven out was because of they just basically all died out because they didn't have the ability to keep up. But
What kind of weapons did they use, by the way? Sorry, did they use
bows and
mechanized
arrows,
rifles
bows and
and
arrows. They would use bows and arrows, and when they had the ability, they adapted to rifles and that kind of thing very quickly. But my point is that there was that certain catalyst that was occurring in North America that would happen any other place. You had people that were fighting in Mesopotamia, in Europe, in North Africa, that kind of made people up their game, so to speak. You had to kind of develop technology in order to keep your civilization alive. And I question why they didn't develop to the same extent as the Europeans. So if the Europeans never had not come in that time period, I think what you would have had was probably a civilization that would still be several hundred years behind. I think another question that kind of comes to mind is, what if the conquistadors were not successful? What if you take smallpox out of the equation and you have still a fairly vibrant civilization that was still in place, but the first encounters with the Europeans, it turns out to be this devastating thing where the indigenous peoples of America, they realized just how bad Europeans can really be. And they say, they have the ability to sail in ships, they have the ability to use firearms, they have cannon, they have all this other stuff. We need to up our game. And what kind of conquest would have occurred? Would the English and the French and the Dutch have been able to establish their toeholds in North America? Would the Spanish have been as successful in Latin America and in South America? What if the Inca? I mean, the conquest of the Inca was very much like the Aztec. You had a few hundred men that came in and managed to take out a civilization.
Pizarro, right?
That's nuts. Yeah, Pizarro. That's absolutely nuts. Like, how is that possible?
Crazy. I think you hit the nail on the head with the whole competition thing, though. Like with all due respect to I think it's called Mesoamerican, right? With all due respect to the Mesoamerican states, because they it's not even all due respect, like I'm going to say something rude, but you can only really react to something you can see, right? So if all of your enemies are using just bows and arrows, it's going to be kind of weird for you to find a stimulus in that environment for you to go and say, hey, we're going to get rifles, because I mean, that's such a big leap. But then if you live in an area, say like you're India, where you've got the Chinese civilization, you've got the Middle Eastern civilization, you've got the Central Asian civilization, and Persia, of course, fairly close, and you're all in hyper competition with each other over these very important trade routes, over these loads of other different things that you're competitive over. You're going to find a more fertile ground, and this is such a horrible usage of the word fertile, because fertile should be something nice and green and peaceful, but more fertile ground for progress, because it's in a very antagonistic sense where it's do or die. Like you either progress, you either catch up to your neighbors if they're ahead of you, or you die. And I think this is one thing that a lot of people forget about say the last 200 years. I feel like I'm going to go back to imperialism, but why Europe was able to get the upper hand on so many of the Asian and Middle Eastern countries is because, like, prior to that, you had something like 150 years of just constant warfare on the European continent over things like, the Reformation and just things like that in general.
Yeah, then
And
at that point, you go into any type of conflict with identifying somebody else as target. Like,
yeah,
yeah, we are here, and I know
mm,
you guys have been living on our land for the last whatever how many generations. But again, it is our land. We're going to kick you
yeah,
out. That's going to be it. Um,
yeah,
there's there's something to be said about having that kind of mindset. When the Americans started pushing west into what was traditionally
mm,
Indian land, there was
yeah,
that concept of manifest destiny.
destiny.
Like this is like it was our driven purpose in life to take this land,
Mm.
and that's just the
And
way
that
it's going
gives
to
you
be.
something, man. That
What's
like
that?
gives you something like psychologically,
Oh
some
yeah.
sort of, not necessarily a superior, probably gives you a superiority complex as well, to be fair, but like it leaves you, like, I always think to myself, and this is funny because it's going to make me sound like a hippie, but I'm talking about war. Like, when you're in a war, you have to have the moral high ground, in my opinion, in my armchair general status. If you don't have the moral high ground, dude, you can have a nuclear weapon and you can go fight a third world country like the Afghans in 1980s with the Soviet Union, who are using World War One guns right at the beginning of the conflict, and you're still probably gonna lose because they have the moral high ground. Like, they have that thing inside their chest where, like, if I die in this conflict, this is amazing. Like, how
Right.
do you beat something like that? And I feel like your focus on the Reconquista is very pertinent for that because, dude, I mean, nowadays people probably think of like the Spanish as siesta, they're romantic, salsa,
Yeah,
flamenco,
not in
all
the
of this.
16th century. That was a completely different
No
situation
way.
altogether.
From the
No, we are
800s.
here to basically we're here to win, and
Exactly.
that's all there is
And
to it.
that mind had been developed over 800 years of fighting on the peninsula with Arab, whatever, let's call them Muslims. Um, so it was going to have a very specific, antagonistic, driven, goal driven, unrelenting, intolerant kind of outlook.
Yeah. In what is it, Sun Tzu's Art of War, he says that the number one thing that you do before you go into any kind of conflict is to explain to your people, and
Mm,
not necessarily, you don't have to be truthful about this, but you explain to your people why you're fighting, and
mm,
that gives you that moral justification
absolutely.
in order to accomplish everything else. You're doing this for a moral cause. You're doing this for the greater good. But what movie was that? The Killer Angels. What's his name? Michael Shahara. He wrote this book, The Killer Angels. It's about the Battle of Gettysburg,
Nice.
and it's talking about this particular character by the name of Joshua Chamberlain, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. He was a professor of linguistics, and he decided to run a regiment during the Civil War. And in the beginning part of it, he talks about how he's trying to convince a bunch of people who have not defected. What is the word? They no longer want to fight. And
Mm,
he's trying to explain to them, why we're fighting in the American Civil War. He said, the war like this has never occurred before. Usually,
mm,
men fight for money or for a king. In this situation, we're fighting for a moral cause, and then
yeah.
that puts everything kind of into perspective.
Absolutely, man. Because ultimately, these things, I think that what it gives you, what you're talking about, what it gives you is stamina
Yeah.
to kind of put it into like a physical sense. Because you can go into a country and say, do a hit and run operation, get in and out really quickly. But if you want to be in it for the long period, you have to have public opinion on your side.
Right.
And if it's like in the context of World War II, I finished watching very recently something called Band of Brothers. Have
Yo,
you?
that's a lovely series. Absolutely
Dude,
lovely series.
that is
Oh
incredible.
yeah.
I can't
Oh yeah.
believe they even made that. Like episode 2, when they're jumping out the planes and they're landing in D-Day, in Normandy on D-Day.
Yeah.
Dude, I couldn't believe that. But anyway, so that is a great example of that because those soldiers, just in that show, but I know from just studying World War II anyway, they had a very real sense of what we're doing here. We're fighting evil in the form of Nazism. But then if you fast forward it, say like 2-3 decades to the 60s and 70s in Vietnam,
Oh
you have certain people, say black people, black Americans, right? You have Muhammad Ali. Cassius Clay turning Muhammad Ali. He was like, I don't understand why I have to go fight and kill some random Vietnamese dude 5,000 miles away. He's never done nothing to me. I mean,
Right.
it's like other Americans that are oppressing me here inside of America.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
well, exactly, you know what I mean? Like that guy threw away. He got a gold medal in the Olympics in Rome, 1960, I think. He came back to St. Louis, and he went to like his favorite, like the most fancy steak restaurant in St. Louis, and they told him, "Get out, you're black."
That's
And
right.
he's like, "Dude, I just represented you in the Olympics. I got you a gold medal. Like I was wearing the American flag." They're like, "No, no, no, get out." So he left
Yeah.
the restaurant and he threw his medal in the. I think there's a river called St. Louis or not.
There's the Mississippi.
I think the Mississippi Nice, a really big one.
Yeah.
He just threw his gold medal. I'd love to ask him like, hey, can you give me the gold medal? But he just threw it in there. So obviously he's going to be coming at it from a perspective, and loads of other black people and other oppressed people in America at that time, of like, I don't understand why we're fighting. So that's already kind of like a losing recipe you're working with. Like, you know what I mean? It's the same thing in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And then also the thing too is that the war progressed, and by 10 years into it, it's you had absolutely no support for it. And yeah, it's a completely different story. World War II, you had people that who were declared 4F. You know, they didn't have they had some sort of physical ailment that kept them from actually fighting. You had people commit suicide because they couldn't join their comrades going off to fight. Right? I mean, it's completely different thing.
Crazy. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's tough for people to understand that, but like to have a cause that you're so tight to, that you're so willing to sacrifice for, that the idea of death, which to a normal, healthy, sane person, I hope sounds really, really, really unattractive, sounds like almost like a gift to them. Like, that's amazing. I can die for this cause. You know what I mean?
Right.
But this is one reason, this is one big grievance that I have with people who are fans of like revolutionary politics, because when you go down that path, oftentimes it kind of transpires into
I was going to say, after some point, where does this become fundamentalism? And then that's kind of a slippery road too. So there's definitely something to be said about establishing that moral cause before you go into any kind of conflict. But at the same time, you know, the Nazis had the exact same thing when they went into Russia. At least people that were on page with their party, they were going in there as a war to determine who was the superior race.
Right.
Now, granted, not everybody in the German army at the time was on key with that. There was certain. I remember there were reports in what's his name, Dan Carlin's podcast. He was talking about how some German generals were protesting, like, you know, why are we setting fire to all these villages? Why are we basically shooting all these partisans? We're military. We are trained military professionals,
right.
and yet we're butchering civilians. What's the deal with that?
Yeah. I find that's one thing I find really interesting. And to be fair, talking about Band of Brothers, they kind of emphasize this, is a military ethos, right? Like, remember I don't know if you've watched it recently, but it's fresh in my mind. Like right at the end, when the Nazis have to basically surrender, like the way that the American general, the ginger dude who played that flipping Homeland, he's in Homeland as well. Daniel, what's his name? Daniel Day-Lewis? No, that's another guy. Whatever his name is, but something like that. Damien something. Anyway, so he's the American general, and he goes up to the Nazi general, and the way they talk, the kind of rapport they have between two military men, it's like really cool to see, because you can see from that military ethos comes this kind of discipline and these principles that even if you are a Nazi, you are down with the Nazi cause, you're still going to act in a military type of way where you have to be dignified and there has to be an honorable defeat and things like that.
Yeah, that one scene where I think it was a German colonel. He wants permission to talk to his troops.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the guys, Liebgott, I think his name was Liebgott. He was translating. He was Jewish.
Yeah,
he was translating, and he basically the speech that this colonel gives his men was I think it was heart wrenching, because you realize that the Germans have gone through that same kind of process,
Yeah.
and whenever I see a movie that kind of where it kind of addresses that a little bit better,
Mm.
I really am touched by that. Like for example, Das Boot. That's a movie that came out. I forgot when. It's been out a long time. It's
The
about
German one?
it's a German one. Well, it's based off of a German submarine captain,
Okay.
and it talks about their exploits going into the North Atlantic and hunting down and trying to take out U-boats.
Right.
And even in the very first scene, the German captain, he gets drunk and he's making all these comments about Adolf Hitler, and like he has to kind of get shooed off stage so that he doesn't say anything that's going to incriminate him too much. But you can tell
Right.
that he questions what he's fighting for. But once
Mm.
he's put into the command of a ship and he's got men under his command, at that point in time, his men are most important. The mission is important, and he has to accomplish. He has to bring his men home.
Yeah.
And if you haven't seen that, it's just an absolutely fantastic movie. I
What
think
is it
you're like
called?
me. You love these kind of war films. I think
Yeah.
I love shows like that.
What is Nitin? What is the name of the film? I need to write it down.
It's Das Boot,
That.
DASBOOT, Das Boot.
Okay. Is it a
It's
series?
incredibly long movie. It's
Mm.
have yourself like a weekend to kind of to look at that movie, but
Wow.
it's pretty intense, and it
It's got
talks
an
about
eight.
like kind of the stuff they go through. They're being depth charged by Allied destroyers, and how they barely make it back. That kind of thing. It's a pretty intense movie.
Did you know that there is a series called Das Boot as well from 2018? It's
Oh, do they make some? They
I
make
don't
some
know if
sort
it's
of reboot?
connected, but it's basically, so the IMDb says an inexperienced U-boat crew has to survive a secret mission, and a young German woman is torn between loyalty for her home country and the French resistance in this World War II drama.
Oh, I'm seeing this right now. Oh my god!
Wow. Dude, this has got really good reviews on IMDb. 8.3 out of 10. Whoa.
Oh, that's not bad.
That is very good. All right, I'm gonna check this out. Um, yeah. All right,
Yeah.
cool. All right, dude. This has been very fun, but I think we should try to wrap it up now. I don't want to take up too much of your time. You've been
No
very
worries.
generous
It's
already.
been a lot of fun doing this.
Absolutely, man. We definitely need to do it again soon. Did you notice, by the way? I don't want to make you blush or anything, but did you notice how many people are commenting about your voice being amazing?
You know what?
Where did you get your voice from?
Hold on one second. You know what? I never had the comment section. I didn't even, like I said, I'm new. I'm unfamiliar to this.
I think it was at the beginning. A bunch of people were just commenting. Somebody said, I can't find it now. I have to scroll up a lot, but they said, if I want somebody to read me I want Nitin to read me a bedtime story. Dude, your voice is amazing, man. You're made for like podcasting, YouTubers.
Oh, thanks. That's really sweet. I do medicine for a living, and so
Right.
it's about establishing a rapport with somebody as soon as possible. And
Right.
the inflection and the way in which you talk to somebody, especially when they're in a point of extremis, that's really
So wait,
important.
have you practiced that? Have you practiced things like tonality and inflection and things of that
All the
nature?
time. All the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I need to talk to you about that, man, because my voice is funny. When I get really excited, my voice goes super high pitched. It changes. It goes from all over the place. So I'd like to get some practice tips on that stuff.
Yeah, anytime. Speaking of which, I'm going to be getting up into the Ottoman time period pretty soon. I'm going to need your help on that.
Dude, definitely, man. Let's do something. How are you doing it? Are you doing it like with some of your other videos from start to finish, or are you just
So
dabbling?
I picked up this thing about the conquest and fall of Constantinople. We're getting up to 1204, and that'll be that definitive nail in the coffin of the Eastern Roman Empire. And I think the next episode is going to begin with the rise of the Ottomans. I think that's going to be a nice juxtaposition. Like with the Reconquista series, I would do this thing where you talk about the Christian kingdoms, and then you would switch over to like the Almoravid or the Almohad coming through.
Yeah.
And so
That's
the story would shift to their perspective, and then it would go back to the Christian perspective and back and forth. And I think what I'd like to do is shift it over to the Ottoman time period,
Okay.
where you talk about the Eastern Roman Empire at that time period. It's a sad story. It's a civilization that's basically becoming a city state. That's all that's left of
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
the Ottomans are going up to their massive point where within, let's see, they came in 1299, and
Right.
within 250 years, they've become a superpower in Europe.
No, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, it's less than that. It's like 150 years technically, and it's
150 years,
yeah,
right?
yeah. It's actually within the first 100 years. By 1403, if Timur, the Asian Turkic Mongol conqueror,
Mhm.
if he hadn't fought a battle, the Battle of Ankara, and basically invaded Anatolia with the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid, and defeated him and captured him, and he died in imprisonment, then there's a lot of historians that say Constantinople would probably have fell 50 years before it did,
Yeah.
because Bayezid had actually technically besieged the city for about a decade before 1403 by just trying to make sure that supplies don't come in, because he was just setting it up that eventually he's going to go on a full frontal assault. Because the Byzantines, they were one of the things that the Byzantines used to do. I guess we can talk about this another time, but I'll just finish
No,
my
I
point.
love how excited you get about this, because you're like into alternative history, like, where
Yeah,
like, what if this had
yeah,
happened
yeah, yeah.
a little differently? And that's the thing about history. You have these time periods where just if something had gone just slightly different,
Oh, dude, it's
and the
crazy.
ramifications that would have occurred, based on
Dude,
that,
think
like
about it
down the
like
line.
this, right? So there's so many of these instances. One day I want to write a book about this, like these what if moments. But there's the second Ottoman Sultan.
Just hold that thought. I got to show you this. Just give me 1 second.
Okay,
Give me
okay,
one
okay.
second.
I'm gonna blow your mind, guys, with what I'm about to say. Yeah, I hope you're enjoying this. More importantly, I hope you liked my. See this? See this bad boy? By Amina.
I gotta figure out a way to send you this. I don't know if you can see this.
What if two?
What?
What is it? A book?
Yeah, I don't know how to make it so that I guess I have to put it up here.
I can see it now. I can see it.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. What if 2, and then what if 1, right?
Wow.
And these are written by people who have done some predominant work in different time periods in history. You're talking about people that are professors and published authors that are doing this thing, and they have things in here that are absolutely fantastic. What if Alexander the Great had died earlier? What if Hannibal was defeated at Cannae? What if Hitler had won the war? On and on and on and on. And one of these things is the immolation of Hernan Cortes, kind of what we talked about earlier. What if Cortes and Pizarro were not successful? And so
Right.
I got to figure out how to get you a copy of these things, because these books the arguments are written in such a way that it's actually really good reading.
Dude, that sounds very fascinating, man. And I've never even heard of those books, so I'd definitely like to get my hands on them. But I was gonna say something. I was gonna mention, right. So the second Ottoman Sultan, Orhan, he married a Byzantine princess. So the Byzantine. So one thing that by the time of like the 14th century, the Byzantines realized, all right, we're kind of dying. So one of the main strategies they had wasn't even necessarily open warfare. One of the most effective ones would be to play with the internal politics of the Ottoman state, because the Ottomans had a bunch of problems themselves. For instance, one of them being their line of succession was very meritocratic, like a bit too meritocratic. So meritocratic that Darwin would have shed a tear. Where there isn't an official successor necessarily. It's just all of you fight, and whoever wins, good job. You're the new sultan.
Right.
So
and then did they do that thing where, like, if they did come to power, if you had 15 brothers, well,
yeah,
you'd have 14 graves, that kind of thing, and
and to be fair, you kind of needed to do that, because
yeah.
the other 14 brothers, they would basically, your whole life would be spent, your whole reign, fighting those 14 brothers. So I know it sounds really bad, but like you almost had to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and this was a policy that they conducted well past the conquest of Constantinople, my
Oh,
understanding.
dude, they stopped doing this like in the 1600s, basically.
Yeah.
After that, but you know what's really weird, and I feel like we're gonna talk about this for a long time. But what's really weird is the thing that came after that was worse than that, because that, to be fair, is very inhumane. It's very immoral. Blah blah blah. Right? but you can't argue, you can't disagree with the fact that it gives you a certain toughness of character, a certain decisiveness to make difficult decisions. On the flip side, when they got rid of that, what they did was it's called the kafes. It's like a glorious cage. So you would basically imprison that person, that son, that brother, in a part of a palace for their whole life. So they can't get out of that. So then
Yeah.
what would happen is that son, his development would be stunted significantly in the way of becoming a ruler. Like obviously becoming a ruler, there's a lot of cool stuff that comes with it, but
Right.
you need to, be an experienced person. You need to be able to make tough decisions. You need to have an understanding of the military, speak as many languages as possible, blah, blah, blah. All of
You have to have that ability to go toe to toe with anybody and just be perfectly fine doing it. And then if
Exactly.
you're in a gilded cage, then you're never going to develop that.
You're never going to get that.
Yeah.
And from like the 1600 onwards, you can kind of, if you did a character profile of, say, Ottoman sultans in the 1400s, Mehmet Fatih the Conqueror versus, I don't know, like Mehmet IV, who was in charge at the time of the second failed siege of Vienna, 1680s. Dude, it's like they're both the same gender, but they're not really, if you know what I mean. Like they're two different like characters and personalities. They're not even the same. But anyway, sorry, I was getting to my point. This is what happens when I ramble. The second Ottoman Sultan, he married a Byzantine princess because one of the Byzantine rulers was really desperate. The Ottomans were getting strong, and they had a kid, Nitin. I forget the kid's name. I think it was Halil, the Turks like to call it. And he was, I don't know if he was a front runner, but he was one of the front runners to be the successor to Orhan. And Orhan was about to die. He died in 1361 or 1362. And in 1357, I think Halil either got assassinated, he died falling off a horse, or he just got abducted and they never found him again. I forgot, one of those three. But he disappears from the story. But the point is, imagine if he had come to power. Like the ruler of the Ottomans at that point would have been half Byzantine. Like his mother's name was like Marie Theodoro or something like that. And she was raised in the Byzantine Empire and everything.
How much justification would you need to kind of slide him into place and make him the next emperor, and then just incorporate it through marriage instead of,
Dude, and here's the crazy part, Nitin. So when Mehmet Fatih conquered Constantinople, did you know this, Nitin, that one of the titles of the Ottoman sultans from 1453 onwards was basically Caesar? It was
Yes.
Caesar of Rome.
No,
So
he wanted to have that justification. It was such a prominent title.
absolutely.
Constantinople, despite the fact that it was just a city-state at that point in time, it still had the prestige. It still had that name recognition that everybody wanted. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and think about it from the Ottomans' point of view. Like the areas that they conquered, say in the Levant and then Egypt and then all throughout North Africa, dude, that's half of the Roman Empire.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And then the Balkans. So, but my point is that calling themselves Caesars of Rome was a very important thing for them. Like, if you tell a lot of like Western people, hey, the Ottomans who were seen as the enemies of Europe for so long, they actually thought of themselves as being the successors to this power that is basically kind of at the foundation of Western European culture. They would laugh at you, but they took that very seriously. So
I think it was a twofold thing. First of all, it was as a matter of prestige, and second of all, it was also this sense that by calling yourself that, you are doing your best to incorporate this new population into your group. Like for example, when the
good point.
When Alexander the Great did his conquest and his empire broke up, the Ptolemies that took over Egypt, they were Greek, but they considered themselves pharaoh. It's kind of along those same kind of
even Alexander. He faced like a mini, correct me if I'm wrong, but he faced some sort of a mini revolt from his army because he was taking more and more of the Persian customs of kingship on board.
He dressed himself up. It was I think it was near Babylon someplace.
Exactly.
That his people were like, "What are you doing? You're a Greek. Act like it."
Exactly.
He was like, no, I want to incorporate all these other things. Their clothing is much more comfortable than what we're used to. So
that's why the Ottomans are so interesting, dude, because especially nowadays, and this isn't necessarily their fault, This is just people and the kind of socio-political developments that are taking place now. But so many people will look at the Ottomans and go, that's the last vestige of Islamic power. So they will Islamify that even further. Do you see what I'm saying? But the problem is that I read a study somewhere and I forgot the exact point in the Ottoman genealogy, but I think it was somewhere around like the fifth, maybe let's just say 1600 to be conservative. The Ottoman Sultan was only 20%. I think that's being super generous, 20% Turkish. The rest was not Turkish. The rest was Greek, some sort of a Caucasus, like Circassian, Serb, could be. No, I don't know about Armenian. I don't think Armenian, but just a bunch of different ethnicities.
But
So the Ottomans are fascinating, man.
that's a common thing too. People who take over and establish the, for example, the Umayyad, when they established their caliphate in the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah,
The epitome of their thing. It was 929, I believe. Abd al-Rahman III. He's the one who had that massive thing when Cordoba was a rival to like Constantinople and Baghdad. They said that his genealogy, he was probably only about 9% Syrian at that point.
Yeah.
He had blue eyes. He had red hair. He would dye his hair. Yeah, that's right. He would dye his hair black so that he would be like, no, look, I am still Syrian, kind of.
Wasn't his mom like, I don't know if she was no, not Basque. Wasn't she from like Galicia or something like that?
She was from Navarre.
Somewhere from the north.
It was either Navarre or Castile, one of the two. But it was she was a princess. That's right. His grandmother, and so you can trace his lineage to that. In fact, at one point, when a member of again Castile or Navarre's aristocracy got sick, he sent some of his own some of his own physicians to take care of him because he was
the Jewish guy has that Ibn Shaprut.
Yeah, because he was like, hey, they're basically my family. So
yeah. That guy's very interesting, actually. Hasda Ibn Shaprut. Did you cover him in? I haven't checked your videos recently.
I did. That's so when I was doing the research for the Reconquista series, there is so much bias. And the more you read about it, people that are you can tell that people are either on one end of the spectrum that this was a great time period, it was a golden age, everybody got along. And then you have people on the other spectrum where this was a despotic rule and people were oppressed and being killed in the street. And it's hard to find that middle of the road. One of the books that I read, it's by Rosa Menachal, who goes kind of more towards that everything
Ornament of the World.
Ornament of the World. And she talks a lot about him and all of his contributions. He wasn't just his physician. He was also way up in the aristocracy, which was unusual at the time because he was Jewish. And for him to have that kind of position, when he built his pleasure palace, the Medina Zarat, and outside of Cordoba, he'd have all these people coming in and he would be the dignitary that would greet them. I mean, to have somebody that could do that, it's pretty impressive.
It's amazing. I don't know if he was if this was his official title, but wasn't he equivalent to a Grand Vizier?
Yeah.
And he was the physician. He was actually a patron of what do you want to call it? The Jewish community in Al-Andalus.
He built a synagogue, like a private synagogue, so that they could worship.
Yeah, but also at the same time, because in Baghdad there is a very deep-rooted history of Jews in Baghdad, and at the same time when the Islamic Golden Age is happening there, where you have the Beit al-Hikma, the House of Wisdom, as the political situation is not being.
Which, by the way, I didn't know what Hikma meant until I met you.
Yeah, that's where it comes from.
I was like, oh, that makes sense now. I get it. Okay, wisdom.
Yeah, but he would get Hasda ibn Shaprut. When things were going really bad in Baghdad and there was Jewish literary or intellectual figures, he would send them letters like, hey, you can come and live here, Cordoba, Granada, Zaragoza, and I will basically patronize you.
Yeah.
Which is very cool, man. But dude, I feel like we're going to extend this conversation for too long unless right here, right now. Because we were supposed to cut this off 15 minutes ago. All right. Definitely let me know about your plans for the Ottomans. If you need any help, I'd love to, because I've already done quite a long video on that already. and that would be really cool. Do you have any cool content coming out soon, like in the immediate future that the fans can know about?
So I've been doing the history of poison. Everybody that's been poisoned in history. Starting off with Socrates with his immortal words of "I drank what." Going on through Cleopatra, we just did Livia. We're going to move on, and I'm hoping to get all the way up to Rasputin if I can. So that's going to be kind of a side project. I'm going to try to finish off with the conquest and fall of Constantinople in 1204, and then take a little break from that and go back, and I'm going to finish the Reconquista. We're going to talk about Isabella and her contribution, what she was able to accomplish, and then it's going to be moving on to the New World after that.
Damn, that's cool, man. So New World, you mean like the Aztecs and things of that nature, or post-Columbus?
It's going to be Columbus, and then it's going to be the fall of the Aztec, followed by the fall of the Inca.
Wow. Yeah. I can't wait for that. That's going to be epic, man. All right, man. Thank you for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. You take care, and all the best.
Thank you, man. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I know I did, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Take care.